you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 13 vampiric clans in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Clan of Kings, Clan Ventrue. Every kindred knows of the Ventrue's obsessive impulse to rule and dominate those around them. The Blue Bloods would have you believe that they are the only ones who have the wisdom, restraint, and control to lead our society through the night, and they can make you think that too, as they will exercise the use of dominate to compel you to their beliefs. Whilst they are not the only clan who exercise the discipline, no one can deny it is their discipline. The more patient Ventrue may want to naturally win you over by flaunting presence to make you love and idolize them, or use it to make you fear them. The anti-tribu Ventrue don't generally practice presence, but we will get onto that when we get onto it. The proudest and most orthodox of the Ventrue are very proud of their lineage, being able to date their bloodline back to some ancient Methuselah such as Mithras or Vedvartha, but none of them will tell you about their nameless clan founder. The reason being? Like so many within the Camarilla, the Ventrue would insist that the antediluvians don't exist, or are not important enough to be remembered, as they are either dead or have been eaten by their own descendants. Lucky for you, I am no Ventrue, and I do not care for such petty arrogance. You have come here to learn of their history after all, have you not? So learn of their history you shall. The origin story of the antediluvian is a remarkably simple one. Cain met a human of exceptional intelligence, magnetism, and proficiency. One account states that Cain got one of his child, presumably Enoch, to embrace the mortal, who is said to be the first antediluvian by their records. The Semitsi would argue their antediluvian, the eldest, was the first third-generation vampire, but we have already discussed this in great detail. The other account would suggest that Enoch embraced without Cain's blessing, which I find more likely, as many of the third generation were embraced like this. In any case, Cain would assign Ventrue as his seneschal, his personal advisor, to rule the second city in his stead. Some would say the antediluvian also had a hand in building the second city as well. With the second city firmly established, presumably with Ventrue ruling the helm, he and the majority of the antediluvians would partake in the slaughtering of the second generation, with each guilty antediluvian receiving a curse that would be passed down from every child thereafter. Like so many others before and after me, I like to mock the Ventrue by saying they are extremely picky eaters, but they would tell you that they have exacting and rarefied tastes. Whatever the mindset, they can only feed on a certain group of individuals, such as, brunette men, epileptic children, or black women. A Ventrue would not feed on any other type of blood, not even if they are starving or under duress. If a Ventrue would feed on another type of blood, then they would still not be nourished by that blood. This being said, I have heard tales of a Ventrue being able to change their feeding habits, requiring large chunks of their willpower to do so. A vampire may feed on vampiric vitae, however, with no restrictions. The Ventrue don't gain sustenance from animals, by the way. That might be worth remembering. The Ventrue would argue that their curse does not stem from Cain. One myth dictates that the antediluvian believed his child should not feed willy-nilly, but feed on some class of kind that speaks to their own characters, making the Ventrue appear as connoisseurs than predators. They are no better than the rest of us in that regard. In any case, the antediluvian would leave the second city, embracing Chowder as he went. Some would say he was diabolized by Bruja before he left, some say he was diabolized sometime thereafter. Some would debate that Ventrue wasn't diabolized at all, but remains very active in the modern nights, or he is in torpor. Ventrue is one of the many third-generation vampires whose history is shrouded in a great mystery, so what you choose to believe can be considered both right and wrong. In any case, the Blue Bloods have a dissociated relationship with their antediluvian founder. Sometimes the Ventrue claim to be the only clan free of an antediluvian ancestor's manipulations, often denying that the antediluvians ever existed, and other times claiming authority over their kindred through their esteemed progenitor's lineage. Once more, what you choose to believe is down to you. I shan't force your hand to believe one story over the other like the Ventrue, I am not. I have stated many times during our discussions regarding the clan histories that the Malkavians and Ventrue played large parts in the building the grand empire that was ancient Rome. Between the fall of the Second City and the rise of Rome, the Ventrue Methuselahs toyed with how one could effectively dominate and conquer empires. Two of these builders were Calat and his child Camilla. Calat turned the Etruscan League into the Roman Republic, who met its demise by the hand of the Order of Mercury. They are, or were, I'm not entirely sure if they exist still, a group of priest mages who were his main enemies in those nights. That hatred would then be passed down to Camilla, who made the Republic into an empire. His sire's innovation would be replaced by his desire for power through whatever means he could get it, usually through the use of subtle manipulation, exchanging boons with kind and kindred who knew not his intentions, pioneering the old age tradition the kindred of the Ivory Tower referred to as priestation. He and the other Methuselahs established great cities, either taking the spotlight as god kings or behind-the-scene puppeteers. Many took the former, as the concept of the Masquerade was embryonic at best and non-existent at worst. Times were simpler then, which allowed them to experiment and expand their empires freely with next to no consequence. This would naturally lead to their conflict with the kindred of Carthage, fronted by Clan Bruja. Now, a quick internet search would tell you that the nature of the conflict between Carthage and the Greeks was more due to economic factors rather than ideological and cultural differences, that the Greeks did not wage a crusade to save the world from Imperium Barbaricum, but to extend their own area of influence. Carthage wasn't interested in wiping out Greek idols either. From our perspective, the perspective of kindred, this is where history becomes a little more bleak. The Bruja would tell you that the Carthage Empire allowed kindred and kind to live in harmony. Their idea of harmony was the mortals didn't fight when the Canaanites stole their loved ones and drained them dry. Harmony was the name given to their death cult. Troil, Bruja's oldest childer, ruled Carthage as its god king, who fed to the idea that the people had to sacrifice babies to feed some pagan god. Camilla and the rest of the Roman Ventrue caught wind of all of this and invaded Carthage, destroying the city and its people, burying Troil deep within the sands of Tunisia. The rage the Bruja are so known for was caused by these ancient Ventrue, and the rage of Troil screaming through the sands into the souls of his descendants. Many Bruja don't know or won't discuss this great cancer on their proud history, and whilst you may dislike the rebels more knowing this, allow me to propose a question to you. Was it right of the Ventrue to interfere and make them view the world through their eyes? Who made them the kindred police, besides themselves? Rome would fall also, which you know, resulting in pockets of Camilla's allies fighting amongst themselves as he fell into torpor. The socio-political structures of Camilla would soon be adopted by other Ventrue and some of the other princes of other clans. This system would be the baby steps that would form the Camarilla some many years later. Of course, it would take some time for this to be common practice, as many a Canaanite acted the way they wanted, just because they could. This got the attention of many a mortal, some taking witch hunts into their own hands, and the church secretly forming the Inquisition. Mithras, the Prince of London for at least 2 millennia, had a frightening grip on Edward II that prevented French Templars and the Inquisition from desecrating British soil and the kindred who called the British Isles their home. The rest of Europe was not so fortunate. Terrified elders sacrificed their neonates to the wildfires as a distraction whilst the elders hid or fled. Such abused childer would rebel against their sires, resulting in the Anarch Revolt. Many of these Anarchs were, of course, Ventrue. I shan't mock your intelligence and pretend they don't exist. They did what they could do to survive, embracing and when they saw fit, not sticking to the Ventrue tradition of old. While some would return to the Camarilla as the form of the newer Anarch movement, but the Ventrue that followed the Sabbat, arguably the true and original Anarchs, would become the Ventrue Anti-Tribu. These blue bloods are the knights and paladins of the Sabbat, sworn to combat the antediluvians and bring down the Camarilla. They see their Camarilla counterparts as failures, and see it upon themselves to atone for the sins of their ivory tower cousins. They believe mortals to be ignorant cattle and slaves of their terrible vampire lords. To accept anything less is to take the path of the disgraced Ventrue of the Camarilla, and the Sabbat Ventrue are not willing to accept failure. The detachment of their humanity discourages them from using presents, for obvious reasons. Instead, they practice Auspex with Dominate and Fortitude. But to return to the onslaught of the clan Ventrue from the Inquisition and the Anarch Revolt, the Elders knew that something had to be done, lest the kindred species be burnt out of existence. To put a long story short, the Ventrue Harderstadt would form the Camarilla, as discussed when you questioned me about the three sects. Harderstadt ensured that the Camarilla's socio-political structure would mirror the typical domain of the Ventrue, which would make the Camarilla the most dominant force in kindred society, leading and fighting against many of the great movements, wars and political strides that would then later come. A lot of Ventrue history and development often coincides with that of the Camarilla they ruled with an iron fist, so it would be sensible to presume they have a similar grip of their own clan hierarchy. They are close second to the Tremere when it comes to organisation, and they are proud of such a rigid structure. They take pride in knowing where everyone sits in the overall hierarchy. That is not to say it is a militaristic organisation by any means, more like a global conspiracy called the Directorate, which set the standard for the Camarilla Ventrue to follow and maintaining their unity, by whatever means necessary. Acquiring Dignatus is the only way to advance in Ventrue society. Dignatus boils down to the amount of respect and deference that a Ventrue see to befit upon others of their kind. It is affected by how other Ventrue see the kindred, combined with their own concept of importance and self-worth. It is not a case of ascending rank, but more an honorific title with merits. At the top of a Ventrue domain is the Director, which consists of 10 to 15 members of the clan scattered across the world. No one knows who they are except each other. What I have managed to gather is that most of them are based in Europe, and that it is not enough for you to be a prince to become a director. Status and geographical position are two such factors that are taken into consideration. Beneath them are the Stratagos, the hands, ears and eyes of the Directorate. My sources tell me that many of Ventrue Primogen fill this role, as they have the clan's best interest at heart, whilst a prince is more focused on a city's interest. Stratorgi spread the news and decisions made by the directors. The Lictors are field agents and troubleshooters who don't mind getting their hands dirty. These are often dangerous ancillae. They are not to be confused as errand boys or spies, mind you. Those rules are dedicated to tribunes, with the parade slightly below them, but with no real benefits beyond you haven't cocked up yet. So with the global company, as it were, established, we can turn our attention to how Ventrue within a city organise themselves beyond being bossed around by the Directorate and their own Camarilla superiors. In more traditional territories, the most powerful Ventrue collect together in a group called the Board, or Gerousia, which I believe is Greek for Council of Elders. They have no more power than a prince or primogen allows. The head of the board is called the Praetor, or Manager, which isn't so exciting but easier for me to pronounce, so I'm going to stick with those pronunciations anyway. The Manager is the most powerful Ventrue in a city, unless they are prince or primogen who then choose someone to fill that role instead. Managers also call for meetings that are both big enough to house a lot of Ventrue and is a safe location for them all. I know not what these meetings entail, but one can presume it is with regards to Ventrue well-being. The only thing I do know about these meetings is that they happen on the first Tuesday of every month. I have no idea what the significance of the day is, and I am sure a lot of Ventrue do either in these modern nights. The managers are assisted by the Adals, or supervisors. The rest of the clan falls into one of two groups. Questors, or foremen, are usually young Ventrue who have obtained some degree of status within the board in exchange for loyalty. Beneath them are the Irian, or associates, who have no real power within the clan. Acquiring any of these titles are much harder than what they appear to be, for the freshly embraced Ventrue go through a whole training program called the Agoge to make them totally fit for kindred and Ventrue society. It is a process I'm told can last for weeks or even decades in some cases. I wish I was kidding. Those blue bloods are thorough, for a lack of a better phrase. It is a much more tedious version of the La Sombre introduction to their clan. The process is all terribly dry, so I shall avoid talking about it. A lot of written tests, learning who and how to address who and when to what to wear and when to wear it, in addition to naturally helping out your fellow Ventrue. It is like going back to fucking school. But you probably get the idea by now that the clan Ventrue are obsessed by control and the power that brings with it. It has been part of their blood for thousands of years, and there are no signs of that changing, even with the Camarilla beginning to crack around the edges. The Ventrue have only ever embraced those they deem worthy of the honour of Ventrue blood. Nobles, religious leaders, and great military men and women have all found their way into the clan over the centuries. The Ventrue have high standards of admittance into their ultra-exclusive yacht club of the undead. Neonates who fail to meet the clan's benchmark find themselves shunned by their society, left out of important opportunities, and otherwise disadvantaged. And no Ventrue sire wants their child to be in that position. After all, it is bad business practice. They set and maintain the rules, punishing those who break them, both within their clan structure and the ivory tower in which they rule. If kindred society were a chessboard and its pieces, the Ventrue would be the players. But I sometimes feel that they are so caught up in playing kindred monopoly, ingrained in control and domination, that they forget they are vampires. What they do and how they do it is all terribly upper-class kind, but I must remind you that vampires are monsters. We are vampires, monsters that feed upon flesh and blood. There are many ways we Cainites get what we want, either by force or by subtle manipulation. Neither approach makes us any less more of a monster than the other. So remember that the next time the Ventrue wants to talk you down. We are all monsters. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.